So welcome everybody to the remote viewing research group monthly meeting. We're all happy to have you here. And just as a reminder, I'm going to drop off. Jimmy is taking over for this meeting. But we would like to take a minute to welcome our guest speaker for the month of May. And this is Renay Oshop. And a little background about Renay. She is from the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. She specialized originally in computational molecular biology. She actually studied at Vasant Lad's Ayurvedic Institute, which she claims is a little bit like a Hogwarts community in school, which I found very funny. Trained 6 months in India, also had an international 24 years and counting journey to study Renay.
Jyotisha.
Jyotisha. Thank you so much. And then let me see, I dropped it. Hold on just one second. The title of her talk is Unfettered Inquiry, an Astrologer's Tale. And the synopsis of the talk: from childhood to late adulthood, science is figured prominently in Renay's social, professional, and intellectual experiences. So Renay, welcome to the group. We're so happy to have you here. Usually the way the presentation goes is we give you the floor for however amount of time that you need. And then after your presentation is open, you can open it up to questions and answer segment. And then Jimmy will man the questions and take the floor to help guide, whoever puts their hand up first or raises the questions and everything. Thank you so much. We're honored to have you here with us, and we can't wait to hear more about your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I'm really glad to be here. Maybe first things first, as remote viewers, why should you care what's going on in astrology? I mean, maybe you have an interest in astrology, and that is great, and we share that, and that's something we can build on. But also, we're kind of all in this together as anomalous, perhaps we can describe ourselves as, relative to convention of the culture of science. For instance, somebody I know tweeted at a scientist just to bring up some technical thing about a measurement in a time series, nothing to do with astrology, but the scientist noticed astrology in the Twitter bio of this person and said, literally, I won't allow remote viewers or astrologers on my Twitter feed, and blocked him. So strange bedfellows and all of that, but we're kind of in this together. And I personally also am very interested in remote viewing and other anomalistic events. I don't know if you all saw just 2 days ago in Medscape, a professional medical publication, mainstream showing of EEG activity in near-death experienced people who are close to death or are brought back from death, and the brain activity therein. And I would recommend you check that out if you're interested in parapsychological phenomena. If you need me to, I could send that to you with the studies. I'll show you briefly. Oh, of course, my cat needs to get up. Hold on a second. Oh, hold on. There you go.
I would love to see that link if you can, Renay.
Yeah, and I'll put everything. I'll put everything that I refer to in the chat. So I'm gonna share that screen with that that article. So the title is Surprising Brain Activity Moments Before Death, and here's an MD presenting on it. So as the heart rhythm evolved from this to this and eventually stopped, but this is a study about the brain, not the heart. Prior to the withdrawal of life support, the brain electrical signals looked like this. And after the breathing tube was removed, you can see that as this red arrow. The power, you can see increased activity at the higher frequencies of the EEG. And there's only 4 such patients in the study, perhaps for obvious reasons. It's very difficult to to get approval from the family and so on at this very tender moment right at death. But of the 4 people, such patients that they were able to get that approval for, there's a burst of higher frequency brain activity immediately before death, even for previously brain dead patients. So this is super interesting. And I think for this Medscape, you need to have a professional, in to log in to become a member of Medscape. But I can maybe, it looks like I can print this into a PDF, and I can send that out to maybe a contact person if you'd like me to.
Yes,
guess.
if you'd care to send it to IRVA to me, I'll give you my address afterwards. I can forward it to the group.
Oh, great. Okay, super. So there you go. There's starting to be studies of consciousness in medicine. There's starting to be studies of the arrow of time and space, and space-time as a force in just the past 100 years in physics, and the arrow of time studies being just in the past 10 years, and how that interfaces with consciousness, with the brain as a prediction machine, for example, or of consciousness being able to perceive the future 10 seconds ahead of time. These are medical studies that are being done very recently and have everything to do with remote viewing, and I would dare say astrology too. So as was said in the introduction, my name's Renay Oshop. I was a working scientist for about 5 years, working on my PhD. And in that time, I was also a faculty member, even while not having my PhD yet, at the Colorado Medical School, essentially, the Health Sciences Center, as it was called back then. And then, yeah, I'm in Colorado, so I know 2nd week of May, but it's cold out. I'm wearing a heavy plaid shirt. So I just woke up one day and said to myself, I don't think I want to do this. And it's like, oh, come on, really? Am I just waking up on the wrong side of the bed? And I said, give myself 2 to 3 weeks, because it was a strong feeling, but I was like, give myself 2 to 3 weeks to make sure this is real. And it was really real. And so I put in my notice 3 weeks later, and became very interested in yoga and Ayurveda, and went to this residential school that's so wonderful called the Ayurvedic Institute. I feel so fortunate for that. It really about-faced my whole life in a wonderful manner, and necessary manner, perhaps someone could say. So I studied, I sort of specialized in medical astrology, and am fortunate enough to practice astrology. My parents were both astrologers, so I grew up with it, but I grew up with tropical astrology, and I specialize more in Eastern Indian astrology, Vedic astrology, if you will. So I got to a point where I kind of missed my friends from science, just I consider them like cousins, my colleagues and my friends in science. And I wanted to kind of show them the cool things about what I'm up to. So I got interested in research again after a 20-year hiatus. And I started publishing in Journal of Scientific Exploration in correlations and other sort of fringe, I guess you would say, in the sense of being on the edge science publications. So I'm going to share my biography page, and I'll put that link in as well. And you can see these research papers. You should be able to pull this up for yourself. And yeah, I started, my initial motivation was to reach out in a social sense to my old friends and colleagues and just say hi in a sense, but in our shared language, which was science and is science. And some of them found my research first and then were like, oh, that's Renay. And then we connected, and that's, I think, a joyful thing for me. But frankly, the day-to-day work, and it does take day-to-day assiduous, careful work to do real science, I think. That day-to-day is motivated by intellectual curiosity, I would say, and also I kind of find it relaxing, to be honest, to crunch numbers and to come up with new ways of considering really old things. Like one of our foci today will be on a paper of titled How Machine Learning Addressed an Ancient Claim. And so we'll talk more about that as we get to that. So, but I wanted to first tell you kind of who I am and what motivates me. So starting from the bottom of this page and going upwards, we'll be focusing on this bottom link in the drafts section. So we'll spend a lot more time on that. But also I have a teaching document where I saw a shooting in a friend's life ahead of time when she came to me for a reading. And I asked her, all I could see was a 4-month period wherein there would be a great assault on her health coming in from a workplace, from her workplace. She was newly licensed in acupuncture, and she kind of said, you know, thank you, but no thank you, kind of to that, because she didn't want to even take half a day off of work, because she's new to this position, to this career. She financially couldn't take that much time off. And so she didn't, and within the 4-month period, she went to open the door to her acupuncture room, and the owner of the building was on the other side of the door and shot her. And this is in Boulder from a couple of years ago. So I have a presentation on that. That's what this one is. And so that might be of interest and is a bit closer perhaps to remote viewing more directly than the other things that we'll talk about. So next is just a sort of historical review of astrology research from ancient Mesopotamia to the present day. This is a study that we're just writing up right now, that's going to be published probably this summer. It has some videos in it that might be engaging and enjoyable to read. It's I maybe won't get into it, but it's a bit technical, and but I did my best to make it accessible and informative. And again, there's some like informative cartoon videos within the presentation. So I would recommend checking that out. As we go up, Twitter followers bias to astrological charts of celebrities. This was published in Journal of Scientific Exploration under pretty rigorous review process. And what we showed was that this ancient prescription for followers from the Sanskrit followers can be applied to present day numbers of Twitter followers for somebody. At first, it was just an off the cuff idea. Okay, did they mean followers the way we mean followers from 3,000 years ago to 3 years ago? And I tell you, the signature in the chart does indeed become much, much more likely as the number of Twitter followers does indeed increase, as measured in a snapshot in time. Those people at the highest levels of Twitter followers, people like, I think our number one guy at the time of the snapshot was Justin Bieber, but also Oprah Winfrey, also Barack Obama, and so on. They all have this signature. And as you drop down in Twitter followers, the signature becomes less likely, less likely, less likely. So that's a regression relation, and it has a p-value. And I think it was like a p-value of 0.03 or 0.04. It's in the study. Yeah, we use some really good techniques, some really good math. We used a Monte Carlo simulation as a comparison group to our Twitter celebrity set. We compared the incidence of the signature in the Monte Carlo comparison group and to the Twitter celebrity group, and got our p-value that way. It was fun. It was good. And it was maybe the first kind of really real study that I did. This one is being sort of reviewed right now. It was published. You can click on that link to get to it. There's basically what I showed was that if you take 82 million Amazon reviews that were published from 1999 to mid 2014 and look at misspelling rates, there's a wave, and the peak of those waves land at Mercury retrograde. So misspelling rates are a function of Mercury retrograde, as seen in Amazon reviews over the course of 14 and a half years. Again, 82 million data points, pretty good big data study there. So that's cool. I'm sorry?
That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I welcome interjection of questions, concerns, comments, and I welcome them in the moment. That's totally fine to interrupt me. Just feel free to jump in audio wise.
In that case, I have a question about the astrological charts of celebrities.
Mhm.
You said that there was a signal that was associated with them. The more followers they had, what was the nature of the signal?
Sure, it's a bit technical to describe, but it's computationally easy to compute. And it is simply that, I'll open this up, in fact, is that if you number the planets from the highest degree in a sign to the lowest degree in the sign, take the first and fifth of them and look for a sharp angle, a 90-degree angle between them. And if they have that angle, they have the signature. So it's not interpretable. It's not like fuzzy math. It's very fixed and calculable by anyone.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I'm just realizing that it downloaded it instead of opening it, but you can open it too if you'd like through that link. And then we start to get into very much more recent stuff. Here's a fun article, Easy Machine Learning with Astrology, and it'll hold your hand and walk you right through how to use some new machine learning AI tools for astrology, or really for anything you want. So if you want to use a data set of your own, but are not sure how to use machine learning in an easy and digestible manner, this will hold your hand and show you how to do it. So
Hey, Renee,
yeah.
the second link that you provided, I don't think that's to your web. That's what you're showing us right there.
Oh,
isn't it?
okay, got
Can
it.
we have?
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's
Okay,
really helpful. All right. I must have just pasted it twice.
thank you.
Good. So yeah, and there's a data set that you can download to walk through the recipe book of using easy machine learning with astrology. And then this first one is the most recent one published, and that's the Amazon study in an Indian science publication that did get reviewed and published. So you can check out all of those there. So I want to sort of walk you through the process of a study using one that was just the most recently published one, but I don't think I included it in this academia.edu profile yet. I don't know why I didn't, but I'll probably do it after we're done today. But I have it up here on a different tab. So let me give you the link for that. And hopefully I copied it, right? Yeah, here we go. So this is the paper we'll be doing a bit of a deeper dive on, if it's all right with you all. And if anyone has a question about the biography that we just covered, now is a good time to ask anything about it.
Just one question of a biographical nature. Your accent is fascinating. Where does it come from?
I come from Pittsburgh myself, but from
Uh-huh.
a Slovak neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
It's still one of those like Chicago, New York, Pittsburgh scenarios where there's pockets of nationalities in different neighborhoods. So there
Yeah.
was like a Slovak bank in my neighborhood. You know, we had the music, the food, the dance, the clothing still from the old country, and we have language too.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So great. Okay, so I'm going to put back up the study I'd like for us to focus on. And I think actually I might use the whiteboard for a minute. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. Let me shut this off. Okay, so I'll be typing a lot because I couldn't find my tablet, my drawing tablet. But this deeper dive, the basic idea is, let's see if I can click and drag this out of the way. Nope, I can't. Okay. Basic idea. Very simple. Similar events should, oh, come on. All right. Similar, well, I'll make that a bit bigger.
It may be easier for Renee if people will move their cursors away from the whiteboard so that there aren't the distraction of different markers popping up.
I was going to say, you could probably take that away to access, Jimmy.
Yeah, if I knew how it worked, I would be happy to. I will look around.
Okay. So similar events should have similar astrologies, right? So for example, the astrologies of World War I and World War II should be more similar than the astrologies of, say, World War II and the moon landing, right? So we want to show that similar events have similar astrologies. So how do we do this? Well, we need measurements. Measurement of each of those things. Measurement of event astrologies and measurement of event descriptions. So this introduces a big question mark. Fortunately, just in the past 5 years, there's starting to be this idea of textual embeddings. I suppose you've heard of ChatGPT, for example, all the rage in the past 6 months, taken the world by storm, right? Where you can tell it to say anything, to describe anything, and it will come up with novel language for that thing. So, so it's based on something called vector embeddings, which convert language to numbers. And these embeddings of long vectors of like the one used in ChatGPT, I believe, is 1596 numbers long for any word. So if you say hello, that has a signature of numbers, 100, over 1500 numbers that describe everything in the feature space linguistically of the word hello. Well, I used those same embeddings to measure event description similarity. So I think I'll close this whiteboard and maybe start a new one without the shared option. So just to make it maybe easier. Yeah. And users collaborating, presenting. Okay. I think this might solve the problem. Okay. So event similarities are through embeddings. And embeddings are so cool, and I talk about them in the research, and I'll show you how to find more on these embeddings. They're revolutionary. They're $100 billion, some are arguing $1 trillion industries onto themselves just in the past 5 years. Very exciting. So, so we're doing embeddings for event similarities. And what about event astrologies? We're going to use degree placement in the zodiac. Okay, so with these two approaches to measured event similarities, so let's see, maybe I should add in textual similarities just to make it more evident. So embeddings, once again, are like numerical measures of text, and astrologies are going to be measured by numerical degree placements in the zodiac. So for the embeddings, we have 1,500 plus entries in the vector for the text description. For the event astrologies, it's only a 12 long vector because we're measuring Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and something astrologically important called the North Lunar Node and the South Lunar Node. Altogether, that makes up 12 measurements. So we are comparing embeddings for the textual similarities and degree placements in the astrologies. All right, so next we have to come up with mathematics for these vectors to say, okay, how similar is the embeddings for World War I and World War II compared to World War II and the moon landing, to use the earlier example. And there's math for that, to compare vectors, even super long ones, like the one that's over 1,500 entries long. It's called cosine distance. It's an equation. And you know, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's also the industry standard in embeddings or AI research to show how similar is the text World War I, text World War II. That's going to be highly similar versus the text of World War II and the moon landing. That's going to be more distant. There's actually a very recent mathematical way to show that, and it's called the cosine distance between the appropriate vectors. So that takes care of measurements of similarities in text. And for astrology similarity, there wasn't an industry standard to this, as you might imagine, until I realized that, oh, cosines themselves, if you look at the cosine wave, when 2 degrees, 2-degree measurements are close to 0, i.e. they come to overlap, that cosine is peaking at 1, right? And then at 90 degrees, it goes down to 0. At 180 degrees, i.e. opposition, becomes -1. To 70 degrees, it becomes 0 again, and then it goes back up to 1 as it approaches 360-degree difference. 360-degree difference in a zodiac is the same as 0 degrees difference. So here we have it. We have measurements of similarities between text descriptions of 2 events and astrology similarity between 2 events. Now we're talking. We have a way to measure and compare similarities between 2 events in both their textual descriptions and their astrologies. So with that, I think we're ready to go back to the paper. So I can do this. All right. And yeah, I think you have the link. You do. Excellent. All right. So I'll skip over a lot of the abstract. The introduction begins with like a kind of historical set of references, referring to like Richard Tarnas's book Cosmos and Psyche, which is excellent. Here we go, some materials and methods. Where am I getting these events in the first place? I'm getting them from an online source. I code a lot in Mathematica, and Mathematica has an events database that includes a short text description and a starting day. So, for example, Apollo 8 returns to Earth is the text description, and the starting date is December 27th, 1968. It does this for over 7,000 real-world events. Now, this is a very Anglophone-centric database, unfortunately. I would love a more general database, a larger database, but my God, if we're comparing one event versus another event, and we have 7,000 events, then we have, if you take, the combinations, take 2 of, of 6838 events, comparing it to the 6837 other events, right? And doing the combinatorial of that, we get like some 20 million pairs of events. That's a lot. That's kind of a lot for my computer. It's a good computer, but that's a lot. So I have the exact number of pairs in here. Let's see, where did it go? Okay, but it's something like 20 million. We'll get to the exact number in a second. But I had to do some pre-digestion of the event descriptions computationally or algorithmically. For example, here's an actual event description. These are just random samples where President Woodrow Wilson announced his 14-point strategy. I wanted to do a computational distillate to just the key words in each event description. So Woodstock Music and Art Fair becomes Art Music Woodstock, etc. World War I just becomes War Road. But so too does World War II just become War Road. So the embeddings of this term, War Road, will be identical between World War I and World War II. That's what we want. And so the 667-70 events over the course of the timeline is in this date histogram. I only started at January 1st, 1600 because of the Gregorian Julian calendar issue historically. That was, I think, around 1580 AD. So I wanted to avoid that issue and just use events after January 1st, 1600 AD. Here's, if you want to get a taste of the nature of these events, battle is the most common word, independence, second most common word, etc. Here we go. And here's where I introduce embeddings. Here's some references for those embeddings. Really highly recommend reading those. They're pretty accessible. As an article in MIT Technology Review put it, if you take the embeddings for king, the word king, subtract the embeddings for the word man, add the embeddings, the numbers for woman, my God, you get the numbers for queen. How cool is that? It's a mathematics of language, like a very particular, like precise and accurate depiction of language and numbers. These embeddings are wild and radical and probably will define the science of the next 50 years, the way, quantum mechanics could be said to have defined the 20th century. So that's how we're going to handle the textual descriptions, or more exactly the distillates of the textual descriptions. And next is a treatment of the astrology. Okay, we have the text handled. What about the astrology? And that's where we get that 12 number long vector for each, composing of the zodiacal degrees for these 12 astronomical phenomena. Here's that cosine distance, that cosine plot that I talked about in words a few minutes ago, where at 0 degree difference, the cosine's at its peak, and at 180 degrees, it's at its minimum and comes back up to its peak at 360 degrees, exactly the behavior we want to show for similarities between two astronomies, two sets of 12 zodiacal placements. And here's just some terminology for that. All right. So now that we have these measurements and these approaches to similarity, how do we show dependence? We don't exactly want a correlation measure because that suggests something called monotonicity, like a consistent, constant downward or upward movement of relationship between the two measurements. But we want instead the more general dependence measure. Is one dependent on the other? Maybe not always monotonically dependent, but dependent on the other. So an example of that would be a parabola, right? Where a parabola is not monotonically always decreasing or always increasing. It does both. There's other non-monotonic relationships, like quartics and so on. So I wanted to use a tool that can measure not just linear dependence, but the most specific non-linear dependence. So there's a math for that. There's a math for almost anything you can imagine, is what I've found. It's sort of like hiking the trails here in Colorado. If you want to go from point A to point B, there's likely to have been somebody who also wanted to do that and who sort of forged the trail for you. So I looked in the literature for a mathematical tool to show this dependence, and sure enough, a fellow named Hoefting, I think it was the late 1990s, came up with a measure for that. So it's akin loosely to correlation, but for non-linear dependence, non-monotonic dependence. So it's an equation. It's it uses some integrals and stuff, but it's pretty doable. Oh yeah. So because though I had over 25 million pairs of events, it takes time to compute these integrals and this dependence measure. I had to do something called a Monte Carlo upper bound p hat versus a direct p-value result. And that's something that's done a lot in biology, for example, and physics, for example. I have a reference for it, and you can refer to that reference. if you want some more detail on it. And so the P hat upper value from the Monte Carlo simulation is less than 0.0001 for dependence between the two measures, dependence between the similarity in textual descriptions and the measurement of astrology's similarities. So let's look at this set of 25 million or whatever data pairs. It makes a cloud. It makes in blue this very fuzzy looking blob. But believe it or not, it's just because there's 25 million that it's hard to see. But here's the histogram of probability, the PDF histogram. And you can see that it's not so blobby, that in fact it has behavior that is quite describable, and that description is in red here, where you see there's a subtle but indeed present dependence measure. There's a relationship between let's see, do I have the axes labeled in this? This must be an early version. It's subsequent ones I labeled the axes. Let's see if I have it down here. Yeah, here we go. Okay, great. So here we have text distance and chart similarity. So because of the math, one is distance and one is like anti-distance, i.e. similarity. So you would expect a negative relationship. As the distance increases, the similarity decreases of the other one, and vice versa. And so, in other words, a downward slope. And that's exactly what we see here. A downward slope of between text distance and chart similarity. And in fact, we can compute an effect size. If you're an effect size person, I applaud you. The effect size here is 0.38. So small p-value and a decent effect size.
Question.
Yeah.
So if you have a bunch of text descriptions of events in World War II, they're all going to be correlated. Most of the World War II references are going to be, between 1941 and 1945, or 1939 and 1945. And many of the planets, especially the outer planets, would be in similar positions during that for purely natural reasons. Does your system take that into account or factor that out in some way?
Exactly. That's the importance of that distillate process, which is an algorithmic process I use to distill the full events description and distill it down to just fence posts of sorts of meaning. For example, here we have Germany invades Poland on the same day as is World War II. So the embeddings for Germany invades Poland would be, it would contain some closeness to the full embeddings for, quote, World War II, end quote. So we want to avoid that for the very reason I suspect you bring this great question up. So that's why the distillate of World War II to just war world is important. And instead of Germany invades Poland, just Germany, Poland is important.
Okay. Thank you.
That is a great question.
So just to follow up, just so I can get some idea of how you're making those distillate decisions, taking the word invade out, is that a conscious decision?
I mean, this is across 7,000 events, so it's definitely algorithmic versus personal. And if you go into the references, you can see the code. But in essence, I think the way it happened was is that just the nouns were used, and there's lowercase translation, and there's some maybe yeah, I think I think those are the basics of it. There might be one or two more steps to it. All of the references are going to be down here at the bottom.
Sure.
So
I appreciate it.
yeah, so you can click on any one of these and pull up the code and the results. So we have this small p-value, we have this decent effect size. How useful is this? Like, how practical is this might be the next question. And just because I wanted to see how each event's similarity to the word war and comparing that to its similarity to the word peace. I wanted to see if when the similarity to war is higher than the similarity to peace, if I could use the astronomy of that event to through a classifier, an AI classifier, to be able to predict whether any given astrology, including the one today as we speak, if it can be mapped onto or classified into war or peace, i.e., is there a time for war and is there a time for peace in a way that matches the textual similarity of an event to the word war and the word peace. And so, I use this standard 80-20 split of data into a training and test set. I use cross-validation to look at a decision forest model, like a decision tree, but a bunch of decision trees. It's called a decision forest model. And I did find a really good model. Here are the planetary placements that were most operative in the model. You can click on the reference to access that model and see it.
So Neptune is the real planet of war, not Mars.
Exactly. Right. And testing this model on the 20% test set. That's a typo. I said training set. I'll have to go in and edit that. I meant test set. So I trained it on 80% of the data. I wanted to test it on the remaining data and see how well it performed. And it was successful in classifying the peace events 95.5% of the time, and the war events 22.9% of the time, which is better than 50-50 if you use the F measures and rows and other sort of standard measurements for success of a model. This is outperforming both random choice, which would just give an average of 50% success, as well as modal choice, which is to say, okay, there's a lot more peace events than war events. We could cheat and just say peace, 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 and get 60%, 70% accurate. So this is much more performant, this model based on astrologies, than either using a 50-50 peace, war, peace, war, peace, war answer set, or the most common peace, peace, peace modal choice, one after the other, just always choosing peace. This is a much more successful model than those things, as based on the 20% test set. And you can click on all of these. These are all accessible. Let's see if I can open it up. This should be what it looks like. Hold on. Yeah. So you can see, like, if you're curious about Mars, you can choose Mars just by clicking on that link of the model. And you can see in orange, when there's a lot of similarity in Neptune, for example, because Neptune's on this bottom axis, when that there's a higher chance of war. When Neptune is at 180 degrees, it looks like there's a higher chance of war. So oppositions or conjunctions. And similarly for Mars, it's much more subtle, but it looks like as Mars is more similar between two events, there's also more chance of war. So you can click through all of this. You can choose different planetary effects if you're curious about Pluto. Here, wow, it looks like when there's a Pluto conjunction, there's a lot less chance of war than peace, etc. So you can pass through all of that and click and drag and interact with these results.
Question related to understanding these charts. You said that there's a higher chance of war when Neptune is in opposition. Is that in opposition to Earth or in opposition to any planet, or how in opposition to what, I guess is the question?
To the Neptune of the other event. Oh, okay. So here, yeah, let me take a look at this. I think if we go back to the data, it's been a little bit while since I did this. Okay, if the cosine distance of the embedding towards the similar. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so I'm sorry. So what I was just showing with Neptune and Mars and Pluto and so on was comparing a Neptune of one event to a Neptune of another event, a Pluto to one event to the other event, Mars one event, other event. What I should have showed you was the classifier. So here we're just classifying between W and P, war and peace. And this model used for this classifier relies on Neptune more than it does Pluto or something like that. So I was showing you the wrong event, the wrong chart. I was showing the comparison between two events versus the classifier. So I clicked on the wrong link. Okay. So this is the classifier. Yeah. And you can see the performance of it. It got a 22.9% right in the war event and 96% right in the peace events. So that means we can put in tomorrow's astrology and see whether it's going to be a war day or a peace day.
Right.
So
that was going to be one of my next questions. When's our next world war?
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah, well, you can yourself enter into this model. I hope I have it linked here. And you can put in the zodiacal placements of those 12 astrology measurements through a free software. I should maybe put this up on my website, except I think I'm a bit concerned about liability or something. It's maybe a concern. Like if I say it's a war day and it's not, but somebody put money down on it being a war day, maybe they'll get mad at me or something. Yeah, I don't know. That I just surely didn't want to do that, but it is something you can do. Here we go. Here's the clonable something called OptiML, Optimum Machine Learning event. Okay, yeah, so this is the classifier, and the data, if you want the data, is under this big ML clonable data link. And you can just click login, a free account, and download it. But going back, this is the peace war determination. So here we have the mapping of Pluto against Neptune, and we can say when Pluto is conjunct a 180 Neptune, then we get higher incidence of war. So you can also download this model. You're welcome to. And here's where the event astrology importances are depicted. So you see Neptune's really high, Pluto after that, Uranus, Sun, Saturn, and yeah, Mars is way down here. Mars is only at 2%. Wow. So yeah, free account at I'm just using the free, pleasant, well-designed, nice colors AI system at bigml.com. It's bigml.com. And you can download the model, the data, all of that good stuff. Let's see if I'm forgetting anything here. Just some references to event data, etc. To, if you're curious about the original data, if you're curious about that MIT Press article, here it is, this technologyreview.com article. It's a really pleasant read that introduces rather wonderfully embeddings, what is called computational linguistics. So you can replicate, if you wish, any part of this. I tried to make it all downloadable, all available. I don't think I missed anything. And I'd love that if you could give it a go and replicate it, or if you're just interested in having the data, please do download it, etc. Okay, so I see the media, IRVA media, her chat, and
Jennifer
that's
had to
what I
drop
have.
off.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
Okay.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much. We really appreciate the presentation, Renee. It's very informative, very interesting. There's obviously a lot to consider there, a lot to dig through.
Yeah.
Are you able to take some questions?
Please. Yes, I'd welcome them.
Okay. So if you have a question, raise your hand. And while people are thinking of or remembering their questions, I'm going to use the privilege of being the moderator to ask a couple myself. One thing that, since remote viewers are psychic practitioners, one thing that may be of interest to remote viewers is that there's been some paranthropological research, which is the anthropology of parapsychology, that suggests that external processes are sometimes used as a basis for acquiring psychic impressions or intuitions in diagnosing a particular case. Now, what you've just shared with us is a very objective application of astronomy to world events. But in your own readings, like when you perceived some kind of health threat that turned out to be a shooting, to give an illustration, someone might use an external practice like, say, tarot cards or astrology, and then on the basis of the results of that, they might receive psychic impressions that they use to help a particular client. When you give astrology readings, are you using intuition as part of the process, or are you trying to keep it as objective as possible? In other words, are you leaving space for your own psychic abilities to manifest?
Absolutely. And in fact, I feel my process hinges on, requires the visual clues and cues of the astrology charts. I do work with some people who also have psychics who can just pull out of the ether, out of the Akashic record, or the psyche, impressions and information. I don't feel I'm one of those. I do need personally to see the relationships of these archetypal patterns numerically and spatially. But once I do feel it is an avenue of approach for my intuition to come out and play. But I personally need the visuals, the numbers, the clues.
So you appreciate having the objective framework to work with.
I do, yeah. And I appreciate tarot readings even, but I feel even that is more on the spectrum, as it were, than what I do. And also, I mean, I went to this residential college for Ayurveda and Ayurvedic astrology. That's why my title of my website's irastro.com. And I mean, it was intensive. It brought students from around the world to study, and it's considered, frankly, the best school, certainly in the States by many people, perhaps in the world by some people too. So it was fairly rigorous, and it cultivated our yoga, our health, our personal, mental and physical and spiritual health, and was a very visceral way to develop intuition, including in ways that would be useful for remote viewing, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Now, classical astrology, of course, was based on the 7 visible planets, which included the sun and the moon. And since the scientific revolution, we've discovered Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There was the 2008 International Astronomical Union's decertification of Pluto as a major planet, which frankly was a terrible injustice because Pluto is a planet. Anything that, to my mind, this is me editorializing, but to my mind, anything that's big enough to be round and not big enough to glow is a planet. So any rounded rocky body is a planet. And that includes Pluto, but it also includes our sister planet, the moon. But there are other and so if you have Pluto as an astronomical player, our moon could also be a player, and it is in many astrological systems. But there are also other planet-sized objects in the solar system, like the asteroid Ceres, which is, it should be classified as a planet. Also, Saturn's moon Titan is as big as the planet Mercury. Have you done any astrology that looks into the effects of these non-traditional planets and what effects they might be having?
This is such an exciting question in so many ways, but one of them is because we're probably publishing in about 2 months a major work where we look at not just Pluto, not just Ceres, but 1,211 minor planets and their astrologies, and showing synchronicities with the meaning of the word, like Ceres for cereal or food and so on, and Google News articles. So in other words, we looked every day for Google News articles for the name of each of these 1,211 minor planets. So Pluto was one of them. And so we looked for articles on Pluto. And what we found was that there is more Google News articles on Pluto when Pluto is conjoined Sun. To give another more emotional maybe example, Ms. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a congresswoman in the United States, actually has a minor planet named after her because she got second place in the Intel Science Fair when she was in high school. And one of the prizes was getting a minor planet named after you. So this congresswoman actually has a minor planet named after her. If you trace the number of news articles in Google News about this famous congresswoman, nowadays famous, you can see that there are peaks in news articles about her as the actual minor planet named after her travels close to the sun.
Is
You
there-
know, sorry.
So you and you mentioned Pluto does the same thing,
Yeah.
based on the naming of the planet.
Right.
And is there any theory to account for why the naming of the planet would be significant as opposed to some other characteristic like its physical size or distance or
Exactly.
something?
Isn't that amazing? I mean, these are tiny rocks out in space, relatively speaking, like the minor planet named after Cortez. These are smallish planets. These are not something that are pulling on you gravitationally or something. So exactly what on earth is going on? And you'd have to go into Carl Jung's Red Book to really get close to how the fabric of meaning can overlap the fabric of space-time through synchronicities and so on. And we talk at some length about that in the publication. We're working on this right now, but we're trying to do it justice and really do a survey of literature as to why the name of a minor planet would have any behavior whatsoever in correlation to behavior in the news articles of the day, like volume of news articles about that name in today's news. And, you know, I come from a traditionalist astrology background, Indian astrology background that does tend to focus on the minor planets. On the visible planets, like the 5 visible planets, the sun, the moon, and the nodes of the moon. And for me to like entertain the idea of minor planets is a bit outside of my training. And so, but I was willing through friendship with someone to entertain his theory that perhaps there's, you know, we can just see if there's correlation there. And my God, we found one. Well,
Fascinating. I
yeah.
look forward to seeing the publication when it comes out.
Sure. And there's an early version of it in that first link, the academia.edu link with the video, and there's some videos linked there too. Is just search for minor planet as a term. And you can find some early publication. I think I presented it at an astrology conference about a year ago. So the video of that is linked on my bibliography page. Let me just give you all one last link in chat.
Yeah, and I'm archiving these links, by the way. So if anyone would like to have them after this, just let me know.
Right.
So at this point, I want to make sure that other people have a chance to ask questions. So you're welcome to turn on your camera. You're welcome to turn on your microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you in the order the questions come in. And if you don't want to raise your hand, just take the risk and blurt out your question. Julia, you're first.
Yeah, I love this. One thing that comes to mind in relation to remote viewing, Skip Atwater had done, I'd seen a printout of an interview many years ago where he was talking about patterns that we see in everything. I'm not sure he mentioned astrology by name, but that he was talking about our 0 point field creating our reality, so that everything in our reality is affected by our field, and that if aliens existed, they might exist in an area that would have a different 0 point field. And I've been beginning to associate that all with quantum, that there are other quantum realities, because I have very little understanding of 0 point. But I'm wondering if the model, you know, and particularly that Renay is using, Do you think, okay, I'm lacking the right vocabulary here. There's a difference between correlation and causality. So is it possible that yes, you can predict how something will react because the planets are under the same influence of what you're predicting, like you're predicting a world war, it's under the same influence of something, a higher level causal thing, and that the planets are also under the effect of that. So when you see planets moving, you can predict the wars because of this thing. It's like watching wind patterns and you see it affecting the ocean tides. So therefore you can predict that trees are going to fall on land, but the ocean is not causing the trees to fall.
Yeah, that's a great question. Causality is a beautiful field of specialization all to itself. You can make a 50-year career just on what is causality as compared to correlation. So it's a really insightful question. For example, the Amazon studies that showed peaks during Mercury retrograde, there might be some third thing that just happens to be in that same rhythm as we find Mercury retrograde to be in. But it's not to say Mercury retrograde then would cause misspelling rates. It just has the same correlation, the same windows of peak cyclicity, and are thus correlated with Mercury retrograde and misspellings, higher misspelling rates, more exactly. So yeah, that question of causality versus correlation is huge, and a huge question, and hugely important, and is a big question. And there's a science to proving causality, and the first step tends to be showing correlation. Correlation isn't causality, but is often the first step to showing causality. I did not show any causality in the studies we talked about today. Just relationships, dependence measures, correlation measures, and so on. That's the first step.
Something that a person could wonder about based on Julia's question is, could there be a third thing that is responsible for the motion of the planets that correlate with events on Earth? And it seems to me that it seems fairly well established that current planetary motions are driven by gravitational interaction. And so, and they're pretty well determined by that. And so if there was some third thing that was kind of responsible for both, it would presumably have to affect the initial positions of the planets when the solar system's formed, or at least subsequent events that led them into their current positions.
Right. It reminds me how in medicine, we talk a lot about correlation without knowing yet causation. Like there's a lot in the human body that correlation measures are understood, but causation measures are not yet, even today. So viscerally, I wonder about quantum coherence personally, as a mechanism, but I would say mechanism is not needed in a lot of science out there. There's a lot of medical science that the mechanism is not yet known, and yet the science is solid and relied upon and used all the time. So quantum coherence, for example, is a way, that's where one chip of diamond, a visible chip of diamond at room temperature, coheres with another visible chip of diamond. Last time I checked, it was up to 200 miles away was at that time prize distance, between the two diamond chips, yet there was quantum coherence between them. My goodness, what about a diamond chip the size of Venus? I think that would have even more possibility and potential for quantum coherence, even unto me, unto my heart, unto my mind, than the diamond ship versus the diamond ship 200 miles apart.
Aaron, you had a question. And you're muted. There you go.
Oh, still muted. Oh,
Yep. Yeah, I appreciate it. Had to get to my buttons. No, I appreciate it. That's very interesting. I had the same kind of comments that Julia was bringing up. I did notice I couldn't help but start looking at all the periods of the sun, the planets, and your top 5 were Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and Saturn, and those are by far the longest periods, right? With Pluto
Right.
being 250 years about, and Neptune's at 165 years.
Right.
And so, did you say those correlated to war times or
They were
peace times, but really in relation to some other body?
No, yeah, those were most useful in the model for discerning war versus peace times.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like they're just dominated because there's so much of their, because in my mind, I'm trying to think of how much resolution we have in that model.
Well,
Where the angles that those planets are moving on are really slow compared to our time frames, right?
Well,
The
also
larger
keep in
planets,
mind,
but then you got these quick ones whipping around that are
Right,
changing
right.
that as well.
like the moon moving 12 degrees a day,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
right.
Well, that's where that date histogram is helpful, where it does it's like an exponential curve with the very most events in that database of 7,000 events being in the past decade or two. So it's not an equal distribution over 400
Okay.
years of the events that are all piled up in the past
Interesting.
2 decades for the most part. Yeah.
And so I know you don't slightly different. I know you haven't published any predictions, but have you made any changes in your life based on any kind of future modeling you've done personally?
Yeah, I've done some like sort of financial, economic metrics and models as pinned onto astrology, everything from Bitcoin. I showed my friends a drop in Bitcoin and it happened. And I think I even put it on Twitter if you want to check that. I make predictions every year about the Super Bowl, 7 years in a row, and I've gotten 7 right.
Wow.
And I still only have like 700 followers, even though I say each year fairly successfully who's going to win. So yeah, I certainly I make small and large analyses in real life, even about the collective expression of things.
Interesting. No, I appreciate you
Thank you.
sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Julia, you had another question.
Yeah, I was saving the personal one for last. Half the people on this call might know I've been working on a phonetics remote viewing project for 2 years now. Now, my last set of data I just went over today, I was looking for morphic resonance because Rupert Sheldrake had suggested his wife might get better scores if she played the game later in the day after all the people had already solved it. And so I just finished 100 of those and I tracked the times. I'm not seeing any difference from my before noon results compared to my before evening results. But when I registered them, and this was over 4 months, if I registered them as local sidereal time, I see some clear peaks at 0600 and at 2300. So what astronomically would happen with a 17-hour 7 gap? I don't know how to correlate that.
No, that's a great question. And that's the 0 and 180 relationship, but for the sun, and the sun relative to the rising space. So sidereal time would have the sun be strongest at 6 and weakest at 2300 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Renee, Julia's alluding to something that's been discussed in remote viewing and in some other areas of parapsychology, where there seems to be a correlation between sidereal time and psychic functioning. And since sidereal time is based on the larger considerations larger than just our solar system, with the core of the galaxy in Sagittarius, it might turn out that some of what you're studying in astrology could have sidereal time embedded in it, or other
Right.
galactic architectural features that go beyond our own solar system. And it would be fascinating to see what might turn up in those regards, if it was possible to factor out galactic architecture in astrological terms and effects it might be having beyond just the planets in our own solar system.
Yeah,
Just a
absolutely.
thought.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a great collaborative point of connection
Mhm.
between the two groups. That's maybe a way astrology can help your process and your field, is to work like that. Um, I am considering, like, one of my publications slated for this year is about apparent magnitude, a very computationally formulaic thing, even for each of the visible planets and Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and the moon, and showing this very physical constant, for each of these, can be used as a predictor for earthquakes. So that's an example, very practical edge science, that is it standard science as of our talking today? No. But is it science? Yeah, it's just a very direct science. It's very simple science, but strong science. And I'm showing it, and hopefully that'll get published this year as well. I would suspect for your work, the use of sidereal time, very straightforward, unarguable too. And like, no one can say, oh, that's fuzzy, that's personal, that's intuitive, that's not scientific. It's it's something that any astronomy software will be able to provide. And if, by the way, I can help you with your work, please let me know. I do have that Mathematica, which does have sidereal computational capacity. So let me know if I can help you.
Julia, you had more?
Yeah, since Jimmy, since you mentioned the previous work, the study you're referring to probably is Spottiswood's paper.
Yes.
And he worked with
James
Elizabeth Todd.
Spottiswoode.
And I know that a lot of people haven't been able to reproduce the same results, but the first paper I remember reading said that 1330 was the peak period for doing psychic work. So I'm kind of curious what 1330 is. That when the sun is overhead, or no?
Well, it depends on the
wouldn't be.
latitude. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious, like, what the distribution is. Is that the average peak, or is that the only peak, or like, what exactly is the behavior of the mathematics of the
It was a
peaks?
time period centered around 1330 that lasted an hour and a half, where their
Oh.
psychic predictions were stronger, I think, or more accurate. But that's all I can really say.
Yeah, there was also a second time of day sidereally that I forget if it was a second bump. I think it was a minimum where psychic functioning was worse, if I'm recalling correctly, but I don't remember the exact time. It's been a while since I've looked at the data.
Yeah. Also, I'm curious about, like, if they're all in London, the remote viewers, or like, what's the geographical distribution too?
It was basically wherever you are in the world at this time sidereally, functioning improves or doesn't, was the claim.
Okay. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it would be, and this is just me elaborating a little bit of something I think would be fascinating, would be looking beyond our own solar system at aspects of galactic architecture and seeing, are those astrologically correlated with things? Because it might be there already with the galactic core in Sagittarius. It might be already built in to calculations, but you could look for other things like the placement of individual stars or the location of, galactic arms or things like that. And it might be possible to see if those have an effect.
the problem then is that, there's 20,000 variables kind of
Yeah,
thing, and
yeah.
that's a lot computationally to
Also,
manage.
those really outer things move really slowly, so they might have an effect, but it takes millions of years to observe.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the minor planet study, I hope you will, we're showing that these minor planets, which are far-flung rocks distributed from like basically Mars to past Neptune, are that there's a rhyme and rhythm of number of news articles about that name in the minor planet, and so in the zodiac. And so maybe, for instance, like in India, they use the star Spica to be like the relative, the point position, for the zodiac. Maybe instead it's the galactic center, as you postulate. So but because there's a presently fixed number of degrees between Spica and the galactic center, maybe that's an explanation for the zodiac, in effect, is the galactic center, the galaxy center, for the solar system effects. But so yeah, I think that's a rich source of possibility. Maybe quantum coherence explains the why of it. I don't know.
Dirk, you had a question.
Yeah, writing on Julia's statement about more psychic ability at 23:30 for a couple hour, 1 hour and a half or whatever. Does that relate to if you're doing, say, a remote viewing solely within your time zone, plus or minus a few, but not the other side of the world, or it doesn't matter?
So sidereal time is, and Renee, you can correct me if I misstate this, but sidereal time is not based on the position of the sun exactly. It's not the same as solar time. So it's independent of your local solar time zone.
Okay, yeah, I pulled that up because I'm not totally familiar. Sidereal time as measured by the apparent motion about the Earth and the distant so-called fixed stars as distinguished from the sun.
Yeah, it's measured against the background stars rather than the sun. So it could
But
be it could be noon in my local time, and it could be midnight sidereal time.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a great background to use if you're measuring sun itself. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, so yeah, I mean, I'm not used to thinking sidereally. So it could be noon your time, but how is it determined that it is like 11:30 at night sidereal time?
By measuring the position of where you are on Earth relative to the stars as the Earth turns and proceeds in its orbit around the sun.
So there's actually an easier way to do that. There's an app for that.
Yeah,
It's called
there
My
is.
Sidereal Time, and you just put in, you turn on your GPS and it'll tell you what time it is sidereally in your area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like say this is the whole universe and we happen to be over around 1 o'clock, but after we move a bit, we're somewhere else.
Yeah. So during the course of a year, noon local solar time will run through all 24 hours sidereal time.
Right.
Okay. Within a year.
Yes.
Okay.
We actually lose, I think a sidereal day is 4 minutes shorter than our day. So it's like you're losing 4 minutes every day.
Oh, and it's
Yeah.
picking off a little bit each time.
So, my results that I tracked over 4 months turned out to be something like a 5-hour difference.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from noon to noon. So, yeah.
It's like a little, but added up over months and
Right.
years.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why sidereal time is considered more accurate because
Well,
of the
it's
distance and the bodies involved.
accurate for certain purposes,
For
scientifically.
purposes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gets more complex as the more you think on it.
And I think it's based on right assumptions. So the hours are not, they're called, right ascension hours, minutes, seconds, but they're not the same as, oh, it's 3 p.m. right now. It's the hours are not the same as the daily hours. The hours are measures of angle, actually, from 0 degrees longitude to where you are, and as a function of what actual time it is, so to speak. So how much rotation from GMT longitude is there where you are, as well as how much of the day has progressed. So that's why, because the GMT longitude is 0 at spring and becomes 0 again at the next spring, but in the meantime goes throughout the 360 degrees longitude. That's why it goes as I think maybe Jimmy said, through midnight, through 3 a.m., through 6 a.m., even if measured at noon each day, like actual, timepiece noon
Solar time.
each day. Yeah, solar time.
Okay.
And there was what Julia said about the 4-minute difference a day. So
in the chat, Robin says sidereal time isn't any good for catching a train.
no.
But you were going to be here, sidereal.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they'd have to readjust the schedule for each stop, because each stop is a different
Yeah, in
longitude.
relation
Yeah.
to everything else. It's funny.
Additional questions for Renay? I will ask one. Well, oh, go ahead, please, David.
You mentioned the galactic center. Is that one of the calculations that you have in your chart?
Yeah. And wait, are we talking professional astrology or the research charts at
In the
this
research
point?
chart, in the research chart.
I did not use that. No, but it is something that's fixed.
Yes.
And so it's
in
built
the charts, I
into the
believe.
30.
Yeah. And so the minor planets or the asteroids, like you have like Chiron and all those in this next bout that you're adding in, I guess, is what you're saying.
Repeat the last half sentence.
The minor Kuiper belt, like the asteroids, like and Chiron and that, they're going to be in your next iteration of this program?
It'll be in one of the publications slated for the summer. But you can see early work on it on my bibliography, bibliography page, including the academia.edu page too.
Very interesting. So is it set up to actually like to sort of put in dates and times? Like, I apologize, I came in a little bit late here. I was a little late to the race. So it's set up to put in date and time and position and get a chart of sorts, I guess. Eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. A geocentric longitude, ecliptic longitude degree value is what we get.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Piggybacking off of David's question, one question that occurs to me, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you haven't, in your currently published work, you've established correlations, but haven't proceeded to trying to establish causation. Do you have plans to do that in future publications?
Oh my goodness. Well, I referred a few minutes ago to the extensive process of showing that goes into showing causality. Like it's a real thing. And typically it involves interfering with the data to see what like pattern results from the interference through the removal of a cause or the addition of a cause, what is later shown to be a cause. And for example, in the Amazon study that mapped onto correlations with Mercury retrograde, I don't have the wherewithal to interject a causative substance or remove a causative substance. That was just free bulk 82 million Amazon reviews data download. And I think like it would take a medical review board to review like an experiment in which I could add a cause or subtract a cause from a process that involves the mind, you know, and do a real life human experiment. That is the stuff of high level medical school review boards. And I'm not at that place. Now, there was a group of doctors, I think in Sweden, I believe, who have access to their excellent public health system and public health data system, more exactly. And they looked at birth months and incidence of diabetes type 1, I believe. And they showed a really excellent relationship with between the two, between the sun angle, in other words, in the zodiac, and the incidence of diabetes type 1.
This is an area where I have some knowledge. There have also been studies of other life outcomes based on time of year and birth.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so, for example, people born in certain months may have more incidence of schizophrenia. People in others will have lower. Some people born in some months have higher levels of educational attainment. People in other months have lower. And some get taller. Some don't grow as tall. And there is a proposal for why that is that I'm aware of, which is that it has to do with when conception occurred and how much how much time the sun was in the sky during when the child was in utero, and thus how much vitamin D did the mother's body process, and so it was early vitamin D exposure that was driving these later outcomes. And that's the one area of astrology where I know that there's been a physical mechanism proposed. The length of the day, and this will flip depending on whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. But the length of the day was driving vitamin D exposure, which affected early childhood development that had correlations with later life outcomes.
So they probably, if they claim causation, they would probably introduce vitamin D pills or something to the mothers to show that. So that sort of intervention is what is needed to show causation. And I just, because of the nature of astrology as being something humans do, and humans do with the mind in terms of what we measure, for example, the misspelling rates is a mental process. That's why I think it's the stuff of medical review boards to show causation ultimately in astrology.
I am interested in the history of astrology, and I've studied it a good bit. I'm particularly fascinated with Babylonian planetary omens.
Right.
And so, like, if this happened, this is just a fun story, but people might be entertained with it. You may well already know about it, Renay, but the Babylonians had a particular significance for Jupiter, which was the king planet in their system. It represented Marduk, the king of the gods. And they had a one of their planetary omens. Unlike us, they didn't make charts. They just waited to see things in the sky and said, okay, now this is going to happen. And so if they saw Jupiter in a particular position in the sky and the moon was not up, it was a sign the king was going to die. And so, well, we don't want our beloved king to die. So they had a special ritual that they would do. It was called the substitute king ritual. And what they would do is they would take a condemned prisoner, someone who was already going to die, and they would make him king for a month. And the old king would dress in farmer's clothes and he wouldn't be in his usual kingly dwelling, and everyone would refer to him as the farmer to make sure everybody knows that guy, he's a farmer now. He's not king. And meanwhile, we've got this condemned criminal as our king. And after he lives like a fighting cock for a month, they ensure the prophecy comes true and the king dies. And then they reinstate the farmer as king. And so there's some really interesting stuff with Babylonian planetary omens. It also was in that part of the world in Mesopotamia where the classical zodiacal constellations were formulated. Can you tell it? And there's a completely different system of Chinese astrology, which is just crazy weird. But I do like the fact they have an outhouse constellation. But how now India is kind of between Mesopotamia and China, and you're a specialist in Ayurvedic or Indian astrology. Can you share with us just a little bit for people's background about how Ayurvedic astrology differs from the Western astrology that most people will be familiar with?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So the word sidereal has been mentioned a few times. So sometimes Indian astrology is called sidereal astrology because we look at things like the sun placement is not relative to the spring vernal equinox point of rising, but instead relative to the stars, the sidereal placement of the sun. And there's each year a slow but growing separation between the two, so that for instance, between when they overlapped about 2,300 years ago to the present time, it's moved about 23 degrees differential. So in truth, the stars of early Pisces rise at spring equinox and not Aries because of this precession, this differential between the two. So we use the precessed zodiac, not which is to say the actual placements up in the sky in Indian astrology, not the tropical ones, which were as they were when the system was codified, 2,300 or so years ago.
Are the standard familiar zodiacal constellations like Aries, Gemini, Leo, and so forth, are those used in Ayurvedic astrology, or are different ones used?
No, they use the same and very similar, but sort of a more primeval system is something called nakshatras, which are like star clusters. And so this is where we start to approach Tibetan astrology and Chinese astrology. We do use these star clusters and give great importance to them. And they're more primogeniture, to the system at large than the signs, which probably were kind of co-created with Hellenistic astrology, 2,000 plus years ago. There was a lot of interaction actually between Africa and China and Greece and India. Believe it or not, there were like conferences thousands of years ago, and so they shared knowledge. There's like virtually the proceedings of the conferences that are still accessible in Sanskrit.
Fascinating. We're almost out of time, so I want to make sure if there are any last questions for Renee, that we get to those. Also, before she had to leave, Jennifer dropped a note in the chat in which she said, "Don't forget, IRVA meeting in Virginia in August 2023. So that's where the IRVA conference is going to be this year. And if you'd like to make plans to be there, it's in August, so there's still some time to plan, still time to get tickets and make reservations and so forth. So just wanted to give everybody a reminder of that in case you're able to make it. I was able to go to last year's conference here in California, and it was a blast. So if you can make it to Virginia, it's a great experience. Also, last year we had an online version of the conference, and they may have that again this year. I don't have confirmation of that, but they may, so you can look out for that. Any additional questions for Renay? Okay. Renay, do you have anything you'd like to tell us?
Just I want to.
Oh, I'm
thank
sorry.
you all. Oh,
Dirk
please.
had a question.
Just an observation, Jimmy, you were saying that, well, I'm a Gemini, and something I noticed, I'm 6'4", and I've met a lot of thin, tall Geminis, men and women. But if I go back 9 months, those are the cold months when I was made.
Yeah.
So but it is an observation that I seem to, if I know someone's a Gemini, they happen to be thin and tall.
Interesting. I don't happen to remember the details of which life outcomes were correlated with which vitamin D levels, but if you email me at iru-secretary@irva.org, I can look it up and send you the information I have. I believe it was just observational studies, Renay.
IRU-secretary?
That's because I'm the secretary of the group. So IRU for IRVA Research Unit -secretary @irva.org. And if anybody else, I put my email in the chat. So if anybody else needs to contact me, they can, including you, Renay. You said you had a paper you might be able to download for us.
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. David.
And so, Renay, I guess you do charts and you do readings, I guess, at this point?
Yes, sir.
You have a practice? Okay, very good. I guess it'll be on your site.
Yeah, exactly. There's a contact page and everything.
Perfect.
Please do reach out.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you so much. And let's give Renay a big hand. Yay. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure.
And
Okay.
you're also welcome to join us in any future meetings you'd like to sit in on.
Oh, thank you. I think I would like to. I am fascinated by remote viewing, and I've had some sort of channeling moments and so on in my life, as I'm sure we all have, and so I'd love an outlet and just a place to share all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, one other thing, this is my first meeting since I finished a 10-week course in remote viewing.
Oh, congratulations, Dirk.
Which only highlights the idea that, oh boy, I got a long way if I want to keep this up.
Yeah, it can go on for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Jennifer will be your host again next month, and we'll have another presentation. I'll be sending out a reminder in a couple of weeks and giving you details about who that's going to be. Till then, stay safe, stay well, and thank you.